In the late 18th century, a pursuit for religious, gender, and racial equality became prominent. The Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom was created in 1786 by Thomas Jefferson, stating that religion should not be imposed upon anyone and that it is a right for each person to decide their faith. In 1774, the First Continental Congress called for the complete abolition of the slave trade, and 1 year later, the Philadelphia Quakers founded the first anti-slavery society. In 1776, the Second Continental Congress called upon the colonies to draft new written constitutions, in which a new fundamental law was to be stated. In addition, the written constitution for the new nation was produced, called the Articles of Confederation. Adopted by Congress in 1777, the Articles provided a weak Confederate government. However, the Articles gave Congress no power to regulate commerce and enforce its tax collection program. In result, the economy was on the rocks, and many Americans were struggling to make ends meet. In 1785, the Land Ordinance was established, which stated that the land of the old Northwest Territory should be sold to help pay off the national debt. A uniform national land policy, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, was also produced, creating the Northwest Territories and giving land to the government. In 1786, a group of frustrated, impoverished backcountry farmers who were losing their farms due to economic insecurity participated in an uprising called Shays' Rebellion, causing a fear that would lead to a complete repeal of the Articles of Confederation. Alexander Hamilton, an advocate for a strong central government, issued a call for the Constitutional Convention of 1787, in which government officials discussed the future of the country and elected George Washington as the leader. Delegates decided to scrap the Articles altogether and created a new constitution, allowing for a strong federal government with executive, judicial, and legislative branches that represented the people. The United States was forming rapidly as a new federal government began to emerge. In 1789, George Washington was unanimously elected President of the United States by the Electoral College. The Judiciary Act of 1789 created the Supreme Court and established the office of the Attorney General. In order to produce a thriving federal government, Alexander Hamilton set out to create a plan in which Congress would fund the entire national debt and accumulate interest. This in turn would strengthen the national credit by creating public confidence in the small treasury. Despite Thomas Jefferson's opposition, Hamilton proposed and passed the first Bank of the United States in 1791, in which paper currency was used in order to provide a stable national currency. Also in 1791, Hamilton convinced Congress to pay an excise tax on items such as whiskey. However, a group of distillers who strongly opposed this excise tax formed an uprising known as the Whiskey Rebellion. A personal feud between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton caused the development of a full-blown political rivalry and the formation of two political groups, the Democratic Republicans and Federalists. When the French Revolution began in 1789, the Federalists showed support at first, but their views quickly changed when the revolution became more violent. Democratic Republicans wanted to get into the French and British War to fight for France and defend America's liberties, but the Federalists were opposed because of Hamilton's hopes for economic development based on trade with Britain. Washington, with support from Hamilton, issued the Neutrality Proclamation of 1793, which stated America's neutrality from the Britain-France War. In the last attempt to avoid war, Chief Justice John Jay passed Jay's Treaty under Washington, eventually leading to Pinckney's Treaty of 1795 with Spain. After John Adams became president in 1797, French bribery over American officials was seen in what is known as the XYZ affair, infuriating Americans. The Alien and Sedition Acts were also passed under Adams, allowing the government to have more power over opposition and Native Americans. Despite the controversial whispering campaigns that Thomas Jefferson became the victim of after the Federalist Party accused him of having an affair with one of his slaves, Jefferson ended up winning the election of 1800 to John Adams. Under his presidency, Jefferson pardoned the prisoners of the Sedition Acts, repealed the excise tax, and passed the Naturalization Law of 1802, reducing the residency requirement to 5 years. Jefferson's Secretary of Treasury, Albert Gallatin, believed in reducing the national debt with a strict economy. The Judiciary Act of 1801, passed by Federalist Congress, was later repealed by the new Democratic-Republican Congress, removing the 16 added judges. In 1803, the new Secretary of State, James Madison, was sued after cutting Marbury's salary. The Supreme Court ruled in the case Marbury v. Madison that Marbury had the right to his pay, but did not have the power to force Madison to give him his pay. Meanwhile, conflicts in Tripoli forced a reluctant Jefferson to send the new navy to Tripoli and make a deal after 4 years of fighting in which the United States would pay $60,000 for the release of captured Americans. Napoleon Bonaparte chose to sell all of Louisiana to the United States for $15 million in 1803 in what is known as the Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson's first-term vice president, Aaron Burr, challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel where Hamilton was shot and killed in 1804. In Jefferson's second term as president, he passed the Hated Embargo Act in 1807, banning the exportation of any goods to any countries. However, this embargo significantly hurt profits of U.S. merchants. In 1809, the act was replaced with the Non-Intercourse Act, opening trade to every country except Britain and France. When James Madison became president in 1809, Congress issued Macon's Bill, reopening American trade with the entire world and eventually leading to the War of 1812. Madison proposed the declaration of war on Britain in 1812, and Congress agreed, with support from the Democratic Republicans and opposition from the Federalists. In the early 1800s, Americans attempted to invade Canada from Detroit, Niagara, and Lake Champlain, were unsuccessful until they attacked by sea. Oliver Hazard Perry, General Harrison, and Thomas McDonough were all successful for overtaking British troops during the War of 1812 at Lake Erie, Detroit, Fort Malden, and a city near Plattsburgh. In 1814, Tsar Alexander I of Russia asked the Americans and British to come to peace, resulting in the Treaty of Ghent, in which both sides stopped fighting and conquered territory was restored. Representatives from Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts met in Hartford, Connecticut to discuss the war and redress their grievances. Known as the Hartford Convention, the meeting marked the abolition of slavery, financial assistance in Washington, abolition of the Three-Fifths Clause, the death of the Federalist Party, and much more. The War of 1812 increased nationalism, expanded the military, and revived the Bank of the United States. Henry Clay developed the American system due to nationalism, which contained three parts: a strong banking system, a protective tariff, and a network of roads and canals. James Monroe, the last Federalist president, won the election of 1816, which started the era of good feelings because the two political parties were getting along. However, the era of good feelings was not by any means a prosperous time for America, as the Panic of 1819 took place due to over-speculation in frontier lands. The Missouri Compromise, introduced by Henry Clay in 1820, admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, and forbade slavery in territories north of 3630. After the fall from power from the French Emperor Napoleon in 1815, Europeans sought to completely eliminate democracy. The French Foreign Secretary George Canning proposed to the American Prime Minister in London to band the United States together with the British in a joint declaration renouncing any interest in acquiring Latin American territory. In 1823, President Monroe passed the Monroe Doctrine, stating that the era of colonization in the Americas was over. Starting in the 1820s, a movement providing rights for the common man and promoting the new democracy greatly changed the character of American politics. The controversial election of John Quincy Adams in 1824 angered Andrew Jackson's followers. Jackson's grand presidential victory in 1828 was a representation of the political triumph of the new democracy, including the spoils-rich political machines that thrived in the new environment. Jackson's straightforward, popular ideas reinforced the growing belief that the common man could hold public office. A growing sectionalism and anxiety regarding slavery that ran up against Jackson's fierce nationalism erupted after the Tariff of Abominations and the nullification crisis with South Carolina. Jackson made the Bank of the United States as a symbol of evil financial power and killed it after a bitter political fight. Destroying the bank left the United States without any effective financial system. Jackson's presidency focused on issues of westward expansion as well. Native Americans in the Southeast had significant agricultural and educational developments as they became more civilized. However, pressure from white settlers and from the state governments proved overwhelming, and Jackson finally forced the removal of all southeastern Indians to Oklahoma along the Trail of Tears. In Texas, American settlers successfully rebelled against Mexico and declared their independence. Jackson recognized the Texas Republic but refused its application for annexation to the United States. Jackson's political foes soon formed themselves into the Whig Party, but in the election of 1836 they lost to Martin Van Buren. Jackson's poor economic policies erupted under Van Buren as the country plunged into a serious depression after the Panic of 1837. The Whigs used these economic troubles and ruthless campaigning to elect their own hero in 1841, signaling the emergence of a new two-party system. The two parties' philosophical differences proved less important than their widespread popularity and shared roots in the new American democratic spirit. The young American Republic grew dramatically on the frontier in the early 19th century. Frontier life proved difficult on the pioneers, particularly on women. Pioneers moving west had a negative effect on the environment, exhausting the soil and killing wildlife. Yet the wild beauty of the West was seen as a symbol of American national identity, and eventually environmentalists would create a national park system to preserve pieces of the wilderness. Other changes altered the character of American society and its workforce. Old cities grew and new cities sprang up in the wilderness. Irish and German immigrants poured into the country in the 1830s and 1840s, and the Irish especially aroused nativist hostility due to the Roman Catholic faith. Inventions as well as business innovations spurred economic growth. Early factory workers were typically women and children, while male workers made some gains in wages and hours, but generally failed in attempts of labor union. The greatest economic advances prior to the Civil War occurred in agriculture and transportation. The early railroads gradually spread across the country. Foreign trade remained only a small part of the American economy, but the advancements in technology created growing economic links to Europe. By the 1860s, the telegraph, railroad, and steamship had gone far toward replacing the older means of travel and communication like the canals and clipper ships. The new ways of transportation and distribution led to a continental market economy. The new national economy created a pattern of sectional specialization and altered the traditional economic functions of the family. There was a growing concern over class differences spurred by industrialization, particularly in the cities. But the general growth of opportunities and the increased standard of American living made America a land of opportunity to many people at home and abroad. In early 19th century America, movements of moral and religious reform accompanied the democratization of politics and the creation of a national market economy. After a period of growing rationalism in religion, a new wave of revivals beginning about 1800 swept out of the West and sparked great change in religious life and other areas of society. Existing religious groups were further fragmented, and new groups such as the Mormons emerged. Women were especially influential in these developments, becoming a major presence in the churches and reform movements. Among the first areas to benefit from the reform movements was education. The public elementary schools gained strength, while a few women made their way into still tradition-bound colleges. Women were also prominent in movements for improved treatment of the mentally ill, peace, and temperance. By the 1840s, some women also began to agitate for their own rights, including suffrage. The movement for women's rights gained advocates even while it met strong obstacles and opposition. While many reformers worked to improve society as a whole, others created utopian experiments to model their religious and social ideals. Some groups promoted radical sexual and economic doctrines, while other groups appealed to high-minded intellectuals and artists. American culture was still quite weak in theoretical sciences and the fine arts, but a vigorous national literature movement blossomed after the War of 1812. In England, the literary Renaissance was closely tied to the concept of transcendentalism, promoted by Emerson and others. Many of great American writers reflected the national spirit of utopian optimism, but some, like Hawthorne and Melville, explored the darker side of life and their own society.